really the journal of best practices. As I mentioned in the book itself, it invokes this idea that I've got this big leather-bound journal that I write in with a feather and quill, like today as a husband. And like, that's not quite it. The journal of best practices truly was a nightstand drawer, the pocket of my car door, and my glove compartment in my car. And that's where I would deposit all of the loose scraps of paper that I wrote down observations on. And the observations were how to be a better husband. And so let's get into that, I guess. The diagnosis I mentioned when I was 30 precipitated all of this, because Kristen went upstairs that night and she was like, okay, cool, got it. Like, I understand my husband's neurological culture. It was almost as if we had this marriage. She didn't know that she was marrying somebody from like a North African culture, and she didn't know anything about North African values or like cultural norms or things. And so we were constantly clashing. But she finally understood it, and she was like, okay, cool. Now I can see some of the behaviors and where they're coming from. And I actually feel really good about this. And she went to bed and she felt great. And I was starting to piece together this picture because I stayed up that night and I just Googled everything. I went on the website called Wrong Planet, which is the wrongplanet.net, which was the product of Alex Plank, who's just a really vocal, advocate for the autism and Asperger's communities. Went on that website. I Googled everything I could, and I started to piece together this picture of like, okay, wait a minute. So Kristen, one key thing that I omitted, I guess, from my earlier description of our marriage and my life at that time was that our marriage sucked. It sucked hard. Like we were on rocky shores. It wasn't going well. And in many ways, our marriage was circling the drain. We had only been married 5 years. So one thing that people on the spectrum are very good at doing is like, is doing what they're experts at very swiftly and thoroughly. And apparently I'm an expert at destroying marriages because I did that so fast. And so we got into year 5 and things weren't going well. I get this diagnosis and I started to piece, and I had thought everything in our marriage, all the woes and the problems were her fault because she was so distant. She was so removed. She was so, quote, over me and over the marriage. She was like, I'm done. I'm out. And so I started piecing together this picture that my wife and I are essentially estranged, and we don't feel like friends anymore. We don't really even want to have anything to do much with each other on any given day anymore. Maybe it's not her fault for not seeing what an amazing person I am and just worshiping me and agreeing with everything that comes out of my mouth. Maybe the fact that I'm not listening to her or accessing her perspective the right way, maybe that's chipping away at it. And then maybe the fact that I'm so rigid and calculated and routine oriented, and she's such a free spirit, that maybe that's chipping away at it. And I started to build this list of like, these are the things that are chipping away at. Some of them are things I can control and work on and fix, and some of them are not. And the things that I thought I could do to start rebuilding our marriage from at least my side of things, I just started writing them down. And I would notice things, and it would be like, this is the 15th time this week that that she said, you have to let us all know when it's time for dinner. You can't just make dinner, eat it, and then we come find out later that you've already made it. You know what I mean? Like, so I would write things down, like involve the family in things that you're doing, or the big funny one is, don't change the radio station when she's singing along, or don't just take what you need out of the dryer, fold all the clothes. Essentially show up and be present in the relationship was the underlying theme of a lot of these. But I was writing those down on anything I could get my hand on, because you don't know when an idea is going to come to you. And there's always just trash and scrap paper and old bills lying around, right? So I would just write them down. And I think writing things down is really underrated, because you really have to commit to that thought in order for it to come out of your body, down your arm, and through the pen and onto the paper, right? And so you're kind of working with the thought as you're thinking it. So I had to write things down if they were going to ever happen, that's how I functioned at work. I would write things down. The customer needs this, the boss needs that. I would remember to pay bills by you have to pay the phone bill this month, and I would write it down and put it on the fridge. And then I started thinking well, my whole quality of life is suffering because the marriage is suffering. So why wouldn't I put the same effort into writing things down? And so it really is it was an exercise in observing what I could be doing to show up as a better husband, writing it down, taping it to my mirror and looking at it every day and saying okay, take initiative. That's right. I can take initiative today. I don't have to wait for Kristen to tell me to go pick up after the kids or, put away the toys in the toy room. I can go do that. And so then it's called best practices, because then I would practice it. And that would be my theme for the next couple of weeks, is I would just sit there okay, where else can I take initiative? And this sort of became a personal reconstruction project. And I had Kristen's help with it too, which I think is really important.
So you touched on a theme very briefly in that, and that was friendship. And then there's a phrase in your book that's almost a refrain, and that is be her friend first and always. So before we unpack that, define friend. What did it look like initially, and perhaps on your light bulb moment, what did it turn into?
Great question. So, a friend initially was somebody a friend of yours was somebody who didn't owe you anything. Somebody whose company you just enjoyed for what it was. There were no expectations around what they would do, how they would behave, because the stakes on a friendship are well, if this person turns out to really be a turd, I can just walk away from them and it's nothing, right? I can leave them like that. And because there's no pressure on a friendship, it just exists organically, and you really see the other person really for who they are, and you can be honest, and you don't have to mask, you don't have to do anything for your friends. And that's what Kristen and I were. And we were friends since high school. We were besties in high school, all throughout college. She went to grad school. And it changes, I think, when you get into a romantic relationship. There's this weird thing that happens where your model of your framework in your mind of what a friend is has different stakes and different expectations than my partner. A friend is a friend. Your partner suddenly, in my case, and I think a lot of people that I've spoken with since I wrote the book, a lot of people say your partner, or your spouse especially, is now not only has to be your friend, has to be your therapist, your free, unpaid therapist, has to be your your cheer squad, has to be your person taking care of you, your caretaker, all these things. And it's whoa, we were friends. We just wanted to legally be together and all thing. And now we have all these expectations. And that's really what changed it for us. And a lot of what the Journal of Best Practices aimed to do, again, the actual journal, not my book, the actual Journal of Best Practices I was developing and keeping, aimed to, we got to get back to at least a friendship. We were friends, and that turned into a romantic relationship, that turned into husband and wife stuff, and that turned into probably 3 days. If I hadn't gotten that diagnosis, we might have been divorced by a week later. And we really needed to shift back to things. We felt better in life as people when we were friends. So let's get the friendship going. And it's kind of ironic that friendships are awesome because there's not that pressure. You don't have to make this tremendous effort, but it was making an effort to get back to being friends. If that makes sense.
Right. It's pretty important for a relationship. Sometimes you said your marriage was sucking hard, and that's usually where people are at when they reach out to us. Things are not looking well. We don't know how we're going to recover. Might be separating, might be in next steps. And so things are going really, really rough. And it's like, we don't want to be in the same room. Like, we want to work on our marriage, but we don't want to be in the same room. We don't want to talk. And this concept of we have to work on the marriage, in quotes, always the marriage. It's like, well, can we just start with, you want to talk to each other and be friends first? Just dial it back to that. And that brings me to a good point you made at the beginning about masking. And I have it in my notes. If we're talking specifically AS male, neurotypical female in this particular situation, some women will talk about this bait and switch from dating to marriage. And your quote from the book, I never meant to pull a fast one or deceive Kristen in any way. I was profoundly in love with her and wanted to put my best self out there. And I believe I would be forever the best version of myself. But when we got married, there was no place for Hyde to hide. So what then happened?
Yes. I love the bait and switch. That's like the perfect phrase. That's exactly what it is. And by the way, don't let me forget to mention as I'm saying this, because I might forget to mention it, the bait and switch thing actually informs a really important piece of, hey, how do we work on this relationship of ours? So I'm going to try to remember bait and switch. But so we were friends, and it was just like, that's great. We can hang out anytime, and it is what it is. When we started realizing we were having feelings for each other, that's when I don't know if do you ever watch The Office?
I've seen some.
Yeah. So there's a scene where the boss, Michael Scott, doesn't know he's on a date because some friends set him up with this woman. He just thought it was a friend's night out. And he realizes he's on a date. So he goes out to his car he's got a date kit in his car where he takes out, he puts on like a suave looking jacket, and he takes out this ridiculous like date hat that he likes to wear on dates. He like turns himself into like date Mike. That's basically what it was. I was like, all right, I can't blow this with Kristen. Like, I really need to be the most amazing version of a boyfriend that she has ever seen. So misguided, certainly, but I went for it. And this sounds ridiculous, but I learned a lot about how to be a great boyfriend by watching romantic comedies.
Oh no.
So I would watch Nora Ephron movies, like You've Got Mail or When Harry Met Sally. And I would watch these things and I'd be like, all right, that's how you win a woman over. And of course, when you're acting like that all the time, who doesn't love being around somebody who's affable and considerate and charming and willing to do whatever you want to do with your friends? And if you and your girlfriends want to go out, you want me to come? Of course, sounds like fun to me. You want to go to the Taste of Chicago Festival in the heat of the dog days of summer? Yeah, why not? That sounds just great. So, of course, she falls in love with that guy. But what we had was the luxury of what I had was a luxury of space, like not living together. We didn't live together when we were dating, and so all day long at work, I would be work Dave, and be like, okay, cool, I'm this professional whatever engineer, and I've got social skills all day long at work, and then pick up Kristen after work, and we go to dinner, and go to a movie or go out or do whatever, and keep that up all night long. Now I'm boyfriend Dave, so I've context switched from office Dave to work Dave. To boyfriend Dave. Drop Kristen off at the end of the night, be like, all right. And I go back to my apartment, and I would just sit there and recoup from all the different things I had to do that day. And we got married, and we're living together. And when I come home, I can be husband Dave for a minute. But also what happens is, as you stay in one job and you're good at it, you take on more and more responsibilities. With that comes more pressure. And I knew how to be boyfriend Dave, but because boyfriend Dave, we could just go and play and have fun. Husband Dave, she needed me to do things around the house, like help out with the kids because she was exhausted from a long day of being kind of home with 2 babies. Husband Dave needed to take care of the dishwasher. The dishwasher's leaking. Like, oh gosh, okay. So husband Dave has all these responsibilities. So then I come home and I would either try to mask as being husband Dave, or I would already be burned out. And now I see a honey-do list when I get home. And so I would just try to avoid and be like, I'm going to go upstairs and go to the bathroom for 2 hours. And so play that card. So when I think not being able to mask was probably the thing where Kristen felt the most duped and hurt, because she was like, you were this, you were Jim Carrey in Ace Ventura. Like, you were just big and fun and funny and silly, and I loved being around that. And now you're moody and you ignore me and you ignore the kids and it's like, and of course the pressure of adult life starts to add up on a person. And so how do you respond to that if you are on the spectrum or have OCD or a control type personality? Is you try to control your environment. So that's where the rigidity even doubled down more, because I was trying to create a more predictable, safer environment at home. So anyway, that's where Kristen looked at it and said, she was like, I could almost mark to the day where it was, I had this great, just gregarious, affable guy, and he went and he shrunk down to this big, and this was all he, like, you were no longer that, we were no longer having fun, all the things that I wanted to be around you for, all that stuff went away. So that does feel like a terrible bait and switch for your partner. And we hear about it all the time. The reason I mentioned I love the phrase bait and switch is because then what happens is, say 5-10 years after the day you're married and you've been living together now, and this person has had 10 years of not being able to mask or do whatever. And they say, like, I'll get a lot of letters from neurotypical partners who say, my autistic husband or girlfriend or wife or whoever did this bait and switch thing. And it just seems like they are totally unable to hear me, see me, listen to me, show up for me, blah, blah, blah. And I always remind them that, like, it seems like they're unable to. And yes, they might have gotten a diagnosis of autism, Asperger's, whatever. But do keep in mind that this person was able to do that at a different point in their life. And it's not like they had some traumatic injury where they lost this skill overnight. So it's in there. And so I think it's not right to presume that your partner doesn't have the skills or the competency to show up for the relationship the way that you want them to show up. And I think it comes down to the partner taking ownership and saying, like, yeah, I definitely played a good game to get you in here into this marriage, but now I'm not playing that same game. And you really have to own that, because it's painful for your partner when that happens.